This is Dr. Tami Dean, and you are listening to the Equity Hour podcast. I am so excited to be here with you today. My goal is that as a listener, you leave with new ideas, resources, and actionable steps for your educational community. Let's explore how we can use our voices for equity and social justice today. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Equity Hour, a Dragonfly Rising podcast. I am so excited. It is your host, Dr. Tami Dean. I have joining me today, Dr. Sara Piotrowski. She is the coordinator of student teaching for history and social sciences education. I got that all in one breath for Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you for having me. And you got the name and the title, and it didn't take up half my episode. So there you go.
Woo! All the things. So excited to have Sara here joining us today. We're gonna talk about, of course, all things equity. And Sara, you've probably heard a few episodes and just say yes. You have, yes. But I always love to start with thinking about what is or has been your journey with DEI and equity work, because I really think it's important for people to realize this isn't like a one-stop, I've learned all the things and then I'm done. It really is a journey. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your journey with equity.
You know, it's interesting since you contacted me about coming on. At first I was like, I don't have a journey. You shouldn't talk to me about this. I'm not qualified. And then I started thinking about, no, I've been on a really long journey. And I think that part of my journey, it wasn't called this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't about equity. I think of things that I've done, a couple of years ago. Actually, unfortunately, I had to do it during the pandemic, but we used to have an urban pipeline it was the National Center for Urban Education through ISU. It doesn't exist anymore, which is very sad. But
that is sad.
Yeah, I think the grant money ran out, but I got to do a course rewrite. And so I didn't get to do the homestay, right? But I did a whole week on Zoom and I got to meet school partners and all this stuff. And I really got to I've done that, and I've done some restorative justice training. So I've done some official things, right? But I think a lot of it has been watching our profession shift. As somebody who used to teach high school history, social studies, and who now I've actually spent more of my career preparing future teachers, which is crazy to think that that's what I thought was going to be a brief moment in time until my kids got older is now the thing that I do. And so I've been doing it, whether it's reading, whether it's advocating for students, whether, serving on different committees. So I've been doing it. And then when you asked me to talk about it, I realized that, wow, I do live in this space. I think back to, and this is horrible. Did you ever have to write a philosophy of teaching when you first started out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And even when I applied for professor jobs, I had to share my philosophy of teaching. Yes.
Okay. So I recently stumbled upon what I wrote back in 2003, and it makes my skin crawl. One of the things I said, because I had changed my major for broadcast journalism to education, when I had called and my parents, specifically my dad, had said something about wanting to be a teacher, and I ended this philosophy statement with the phrase, "Daddy knows best." I can feel myself getting hot. Good. No, I mean, I love my dad, which is also a stop on my equity journey. Neither of my parents went to college, so I'm first gen. My parents are actually high school sweethearts, but they were fierce advocates of public education. When the neighborhood school, I grew up in the Joliet area, when the neighborhood school closed, my parents were in there at meetings and doing things, and it closed, unfortunately. So then they filled out an application and I was able to go to a magnet school. And so I was still part of the Joliet Public Schools, but now later in life, actually in teaching history, I learned I am a product of desegregation. I am a product of integration, right? I was bused the east side of Joliet. I filled out, and it was, so just thinking about some of the pieces, my parents really wanted me to have a good education. Coincidentally, they also only paid for A's and B's. Nothing like getting that C in weather, like writing a number down and negotiating with my mom, like across the table, like this is what I can give you.
Tea and weather. That was a course? That was a class, weather?
It was part of the geography endorsement. Yeah.
Oh.
So like there have been things that I've been doing, things that I've learned about myself. Oh, so in that same statement, besides the fact that I just really want to chalk it up to I was like trying to finish this quickly. I also said that like my philosophy was like, I will meet students in the middle. Like I will, like if you will do things, I will meet you in the middle. That I can't do that anymore. I can't like that is the famous little like the image of like equity versus equality.
Like with the boxes and then the remover of the fence and yes.
And I use that in a lot of my classes because we'll get some people like, this is going to be an equity thing. And I was like, but it is an equity issue and it's an access issue and it's a privilege issue. And so I think back then, before I had spent a significant amount of time in a classroom, I was like, meet me in the middle. Like if you do things, if you show up, I'll do what I can. Well, there are some students that they're already starting in the middle. So they have very little due. They need very little from me. And then there's students that are over here that just getting them to the middle isn't even going to be enough. So I think that like I've learned, I think a lot of my equity issue has been experience. I think another part of my equity journey has also been becoming a mother. Nothing stops you in your track like your kid wanting to like know why something isn't fair. You know what I mean? And so I think that so in the summer of 2020, I put some books aside because I am notoriously, as somebody who has multiple degrees in history, can't remember like names and dates. So I brought the books along.
That's okay. You know what? Are the dates and names the most important part? Like, I'm just kidding. You know what? I will say this. So I used to not like history. Like,
oh, that's fair. I mean, there's a lot
disclosure.
Of
because it was so boring, right? Like memorize this stuff. We're going to talk about the same little chunk of history like 8 times, But then I met people who love history and we're actually talking about the story of history and it made little hearts. That was so cool. Okay.
Whoa.
I didn't know it did that. Okay, y'all, like there were little hearts on the screen. That was so cool. Okay, I'm going to show that clip. I'm going to have to put that clip out on Instagram because that was super cool. But no, I really met people that love history and then really actually told the story of history because that's the power of history is the narrative and the story of the people, because I'm super big on narrative and storytelling because that is how I believe we connected, how we have historically throughout history connected as humans. And that is how we should be able to continue to connect with humans, which is also why I love a podcast, right? Because that's what a podcast is. It is a story, right? We're having a conversation and we're telling a story. So no judgment there, but that was full disclosure. I used to not like history. Now I think it's super cool because I hang out with the cool people that are
We make it happen. Am I allowed to ask you questions?
Oh, you can ask me a question if you want. Sure.
I don't know the rules. This is my first time on a podcast. So I'm curious, like what story made you like history? Is it because the stories up until that point you weren't represented? Were they like dead white men?
Oh, that is interesting.
Is that really pointed? Because I've asked you a question, but then I can tell you why I got into history, but I want to hear your answer.
That's interesting. Only because I, ironically enough, have not thought about that perspective around my study of history. It is probably very true because I have talked in the past about just growing up a multiracial, multi-ethnic person, going to high school in the early 90s in a school that was predominantly white, right? Like there was a lot of how do you identify yourself? Like being a multiracial person didn't exist in 1990, right? So yes, that perspective was probably missing, but I probably wouldn't have recognized it then. What I think captured me was the passion of the people or the person that was starting to tell me about these historical events. And I was like, that is super intriguing. Like there was interesting information that connected back to the actual people living in the time around the history. So that's kind of what, brought me in to it.
No. And when you think of what that person, place, thing, event, or idea in history was that like hooked you, if you ever think of it, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Because mine was the OG American Girl dolls.
Oh.
So I'm just going to keep outing myself as your dorkiest guest in fifth
Look,
grade.
we're all dorky. That's why we're here. I mean, just saying.
In fifth grade, with my paper route money.
I had a paper route.
Yes, I came home from school and I had to roll the papers and I put the bag on my scooter and I went and then also, can we talk about the fact that my parents, I mean, this entire generation, right? Like they would send me out with this little like clipboard thing to go collect money from people. And they either had to write me a check or give me exact change. I was just out going to get their paper money. Like they gave me the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that job doesn't even exist because A, that means you would have to buy papers. And B, I think that paper routes now are to people that go early in the morning and they drive around because they can't actually, there's not enough papers to be passed in a subdivision like if they drive around, I believe is how it's paid.
Interested in learning more about equity coaching for you or your educators? Sign up for a free connection call with me, Dr. Tami, to discuss a personalized plan. The link is in the show notes. I don't know. My paper route was in my neighborhood and the adjoining neighborhood. And then a friend of mine had the route on the neighborhood across the way from us. So sometimes we would sub for each other. Oh. But yeah, I had to deliver the papers early in the morning. So this is shout out to my dad because he did, we propped up the hatchback with a broomstick. Yeah. And then I sat out the back inhaling all the exhaust fumes, but like I delivered all the papers, but he would get up and he would, drive me around. Sometimes I would go on my bike and I had the big bag, and then I would, throw them out, very cliche, but yeah.
No, I did it on my scooter, and I think I had to deliver them by like 5 or 5:30. To think that like that people had to wait until Sara got home from school, have a quick snack, roll the papers, rubber band them, put them in my bag, and come out. Like that's how people had to wait to get their news in the 90s.
It totally boggles like my own children's mind. They're like, well, how did you know information? I said, well, we had to wait till the next day, or we watched the news at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, it didn't show up on my For You page. And let's talk about how you shouldn't just get your news from TikTok. That's a whole nother.
A whole nother episode. That's a whole nother episode. Okay, so you had a paper route.
Got a paper route, saved my money. At that point, I had the books, both from the library, and I had some. And so I had Kirsten was my first American Girl doll. So fifth grade, arguably a smidge too old to be playing with dolls, but that's how I like really got into history, learning about the planes. And there was Molly and Samantha and Felicity, I think were the first four. And nothing struck me like when my daughter, who I believe we got her first American Girl doll catalog before she could sit up. So like it's like they have some sort of like spidey sense, like, oh, we should send catalog.
They're like, we need the mailing list of the births that happened at the hospital, and then we're going to send you our catalog.
And we still get them, by the way, even though she doesn't. My daughter is now 13; she's almost 14. But we got one last week, and American Girl has partnered with the Disney princesses. I was like, oh, that would have. But so to get back, that is how I learned about history. I learned about girls my age, what they were doing, who they were with, their trials and tribulation. My daughter was into American Girl. Her first was Kit. We joke that she used to like play Great Depression. It's like she had a little typewriter and a little like scooter thing. Tell me your mom's a history professor without, right?
Oh my gosh.
So
that's so crazy. But it's the
Like
story, right? You could
it
relate
was,
to their story.
those were the stories. That's what I wanted to learn more about. And so I have no idea how we even got here. I have outed myself for talking about American Girl and
We
getting
your equity journey. We were
equity
talking about history and the love of
history,
history and how you became like interested in history.
yes,
So, as a part of your journey of history.
part of my
Yes.
journey. So, and I
Yes.
think back like to high school, my electives, they had I don't remember what the class was called, but essentially we read Malcolm X's biography, autobiography, auto,
Mhm.
yes, autobiography. And we read A Rumor of War, a Vietnam book. So essentially it was like a civil rights, Cold War, Vietnam class, only female in the class. And that happened quite a few times when I was in college as well, like the only
Mm.
female in the history class. One of the districts I taught in, I was the first female social studies teacher in 2005. So like I've been, with the whole idea that like, social studies teachers are there to coach. I've been in spaces,
Yes.
where now to be clear, I've worked with a lot of great men and women. I've worked with a lot of great colleagues, but a lot of that sexism persists and a lot of it is that stereotype. And I think every year that I've taught history or I've taught people how to teach history, a lot of it is about whose stories who can we include, right?
Mhm.
Like first, I think first it was like Black History as we just got out of Black History Month, right? Because we should
Mhm.
only talk about that in February, right? And now we're in Women's History Month, right? So
Mhm.
I think, and if you think back to like old textbooks, they just used to have like a little picture of
A little
different
side, a
little
little
aside.
inset. That's
Yeah.
it. With like
Um,
one woman, like
right.
one. And it was always
Right.
the same one.
Right. I'm trying now. I'm like, like some Eleanor Roosevelt. Not that she's not, some like just some like very
It'll be like
oh
Pocahontas.
yes,
It'll be like Betsy Ross,
Betsy.
Susan
Right.
B. Anthony,
Rosa Parks. There you go.
Rose
Two birds, one
Parks,
stone. Right. Civil rights. She's Black. She's a woman. I mean, she could be in both months. Right.
Harriet Tubman.
February and March. You could learn about her or learn about them for 2 out of the 12 months. That makes sense. So
Yeah,
I think did you say where can I say the state that I live in? Have you
of
already said where?
course.
Okay. So in
Yes.
Illinois, sorry, I don't know why I'm asking, actually, there's so many rules. Am I allowed to ask questions? Can I say where I live? So we have lots of mandates now in this state. We were the fifth state to require LGBTQ plus history. We have Asian American history, so I am proud to live in a state that we are making sure that there are more voices heard. I went to a panel last week about the movie Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yes.
Oh, and so it was one of our faculty members and she had a couple indigenous folks there, one of them from the Osage Nation. Um, and like we're talking about everything and they're like, yeah, but in Oklahoma where this took place, they're not allowed to teach it. And it was only in the last 3 years that in Oklahoma they can teach about the Tulsa Race Massacre, not the Tulsa Race Riot. And so it's just like boggles me.
Oh, it boggles my mind as well, right? I'm not sure why there's this idea if we act like it didn't happen, then that means it didn't happen. I and I and I'm curious why this is so prevalent in America, right? Because I think of like the Holocaust
Yeah.
and how in Germany and in those places, like they're not trying to hide from the history or make these persons heroic in some way. They are being true to the devastating loss and genocide that happened in the Holocaust. And I really don't know why
And
that can't happen here
I
or
don't,
hasn't.
and I mean, I think a lot of it is politics, right? I think it is who's in charge of our school boards, who's writing our curriculums, what Texas wants, Texas gets, right? Like with textbooks. There's a really good New York Times article that compares Texas and California textbooks that we often have our students read that give just like full-on excerpts.
Hmm.
But so the space that I live in right now, preparing future teachers in Illinois, right? But they can go anywhere because you can say whatever you want about our state, but we have great reciprocity with our license. Our license is chef's kiss. Like you can go like 30 something states, but they are young, impressionable, largely white, right? Like I think what's the stat? Like 82% of teachers are white and female. And that's looking at like,
In middle class.
yes, and middle class. And I know it is skewed a little bit different for high school because I know a lot of like when you do the full chunk, with elementary. But either way,
Yeah.
right now our program was like flirting with 50-50 in terms of gender, and like we now have more male students again. I don't know like the exact like breakdown. In our program, we make up about give on any given year between 70 to 80% of the history department. They are history ed. And
Hmm.
so they're terrified to teach anything controversial, right? Because they don't want to lose their jobs. And mostly they want to get through student teaching, right? So because the whole goal, pass, get your
Right.
certificate, get a letter of rec. And so a lot of times we have to say, like, read the room, right? Like, know the district that you're in. We're not saying that this is where you have to teach for life, but this is, you need to respect kind of the norms established. Now, that doesn't mean you can't push back by like having credible sources that you've cited, and doing things like that. But more and more often, and we try so hard to teach them strategies that they can use in the classroom that will make sure that both sides of any argument are given equal weight.
Hmm.
But we also talk about when we don't debate closed issues. Was slavery bad? Okay. We don't need to debate that, right? Like, should gay marriage be legal? But it's because you read these stories or like people that like set up a mock slave.
Oh, you mean like that? Oh my gosh, what did I see? Where they were like, oh, they labeled one room white,
Mhm.
entry whites only, blacks only. I was like,
Mm-mm. So,
why?
so some of this stuff, it's like
Like
use common,
trauma, right? But
right?
that's like
Oh,
trauma.
I know.
You're inducing trauma.
And so it's like use your best judgment. It's kind of like when students are like, is this appropriate to wear for student teaching? If you had to ask me, the answer is no. Right? The goal
I
is
would always be like, okay, check, lean over, da da da, this, that. They're like, what?
right. But it was
Yo,
funny. One of the students made a comment. He's like, well, the new MLB pants aren't allowed because they're like see-through. I don't always get sports jokes, but I did know that one.
gosh.
But and so we try to arm them with like teaching strategies. Like we'll do a structured academic controversy, right? Have you
Hmm.
ever heard of this? Where you
Yes.
present each side and each side has to speak and take notes and say it back. And whether it's a fishbowl discussion, a QFT, a question formulation technique. Like, so what we're trying to do is, especially in our methods classes, like let's arm them with the strategies that they can walk into a building, they're given the standard or they're given the content or however that is aligned, and they can pull out sources that they can help students have a healthy dialogue.
Hmm.
And really, as somebody who doesn't personally love like full on confrontation, like I love a good discussion, but I don't like to come out swinging just for the sake of swinging. And that's what also has a lot of students shut down. We also talk about like, do you have to have a debate? Because a debate insinuates that there's going to be a winner and a loser.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of complex issues in history and in the social sciences that you can say yes, but or no, but. And so the idea that, and you're teaching them you're ultimately want your students, like our students who will teach future high school students, that they can look for sources, that they can listen, for understanding. And, and so but they're very nervous about where they will get a job and what that will mean for what they get to teach,
Yeah.
because we've prepared them to to look at all of these stories, Indigenous, LGBTQ, all of them. And a lot of our students are really looking forward to that. And they don't want to go to a place where they could lose their job if they do.
Yes. Well, I live in Texas now.
I know I
So,
didn't mean that was like not, I said it just because Texas really not that you
oh,
control it, but
but
like,
they do. But I think that's important, right? Because there are so many educators in Texas that still are looking to try to have these conversations. So I did some teacher prep here in Texas for a while, right? And this would be the conversation like you're talking about. Well, how do I do this? How do I bring this up? How do I similar thing. Know the why and the research that backs up why you're doing it and the process, right? But I understand why they're afraid and scared. And I think that's also part of why conversations like this are so important, is because our collective voice has power. And when we speak up about our profession to the people that are trying to make decisions about what we do in our classroom, because just because you went to school doesn't mean you know how to best teach. You were just a student, okay? Which is great, but we're professionals, right? So knowing and
having to do this.
Yes, we know how to do that. A primary source is a primary source, or a book, right, that represents another viewpoint of life or experience or a culture is just as valid, right? It doesn't mean it's quote unquote woke. Interested in learning more and getting a customized plan for you or your educators? Sign up for a free connection call with me, Dr. Tami, to discuss your personalized plan. The link is in the show notes.
I hate that. I hate that that word has become like weaponized, like, or that it's like, I guess, that, it's like a joke, like my children, they will call me a Karen or a boomer or what, you're just like as a way to like be mean teenagers. I joke that I have the mean teens. They really do actually love me very much. But it's the whole idea, even in my classes, they will be like, my students will be like, okay, so like, how do I like what I believe in personifies being woke? Like, how do I not be labeled woke? I was like, I don't know, because I don't want the bad label, but I want to teach what comes with the bad label.
Yes. Yes.
And like name calling for no reason.
Yes.
Oh no, well, there's a reason.
Well, there is a reason. And I think there is, I'm like trying to figure out, I'm like, how do I want to say this? I think there are some people that are just following the pack.
Yeah.
Because, right, as humans, we always are trying to categorize and group, and like we do all of these things to make sense of our world. And they're like, oh, this person said this, and I respect this person or whatever for this certain person, and I'm just going to follow what they say. And I'm going to keep repeating it, even though I have absolutely no idea what that actually means, right? So coming back to what you were talking about, teaching critical thinking skills and looking at the factual information around what happened in history, or a primary source document or evidence from history, removes that piece to me in my mind, right? Because this is the actual document from that time and the words of the people in that moment.
Well, and like some of my favorite things, okay, I shouldn't say favorite, but like to show a contract, a teaching contract, and basically that like a woman couldn't marry, that she couldn't be out past 8 p.m., that she had to be there in time to like start the fire and sweep the floor. And it's like, or even like when I get to the 1950s and stuff, the propaganda that was shared, like the date your family. And it's like it's like a video about how to, the daughter sets out the dessert and, just like how to be a good, I would be a terrible 1950s housewife. Like I would
Oh,
be
I would have been horrible. I would have been horrible. Horrible.
poor.
Okay. I just had this thought and I'm curious what you're thinking about it, right? Because you're bringing up historically speaking around education, and education has historically been a female led profession, and patriarchy, right, has
Mhm.
been the, this major system in force that influences everything we do, even if you don't think it is, folks. It is, because
Yeah.
you like grew up and live in this system. So I just am starting to think about, right, the patriarchy and
Mhm.
how the pushback around what happens in education because of the women are still
Mhm.
not viewed as
Yeah.
intellectual beings that can handle these decisions and things like that, right? Because even if you look at, a lot of leadership in education are male,
Mhm.
right? So I don't know, thoughts on that very complicated
Oh,
thinking.
it's a very on our next episode. No, I'm just kidding. I think,
This happens on every episode, just so you know. Like, I could really branch off into like
oh,
multiple
the ones I've
episodes.
listened to, I was like, oh, she could do like a whole separate podcast about this, like a whole series. So, okay. Like I said, I got some books. I didn't even talk about this
Oh,
one. This book is anti-racist.
oh, I love that book. Love that
Um,
book.
Got that in summer 2020. Actually did some of the activities with my children. That is when let's see, whose copy is this? This was Jake's. He had just learned cursive. This is when, again, your mom is a teacher, that she's making you do an anti-racist workbook. But we had some really good discussions surrounding it. And one of them is that I am and I am. And I bring that up
Mm.
because I am a mother, but I'm also a very capable woman, right? Like the idea that something doesn't define me. Okay, but so I was just moving that out of the way. These two books, Men Explain Things to Me and Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle, are pretty much the equivalent of my Bibles these days. Like my
Oh,
important texts. Are you familiar with either of these?
I have actually not read either of these. I'm very excited though to hear about them, and I will, in the show notes, I'll put some links there for y'all too.
So this one actually, this was actually gifted to me by someone else who has been on your podcast.
With the cool
You
kids.
you do hang out, and I have purchased, like, I just kind of like usually have some copies around so I can give them to people and things like that.
I've had
And
drop them
so
in some free little libraries.
Oh, yeah, I should do that. Normally, what I do is I give them to female students who
Mhm.
come to talk to me because they feel that their male classmates are explaining things to them or talking over them, or they will say something and it isn't until the male student says it that it's recognized.
Ooh.
Listen, I had one student tell me they were working in groups and she was typing on her computer, and her male classmate took her computer and started typing
Why?
because he could type faster, better. I have no idea. So this book,
Could he
it-
also land a plane? I'm just sorry.
right?
I couldn't. I'm sorry. I
No,
couldn't help it.
absolutely. And this book is a series of short essays. You can and you can learn, like, it's not like, because we are as women incredibly burnt out. So it's not like extra reading, but I think this talks about like gender inequality, the
Mm,
patriarchy. It does, like, trigger warning, get into some violence against women, just a little
mm.
heads up, like, because that is, a very unfortunate part about being a woman. I think like it opens up, like, one of the first or second essays is about like the stats surrounding rape that is incredibly alarming.
Oh, like if you're in a room with three women, at least one in three women or something like that has been a victim of sexual assault.
here in the United States, this is from 2013, it is reported a rape every 6.2 minutes. 1 in 5 women will be raped in their lifetime. Yes. They are generally, to be clear, I mean, that's a very relevant topic and not to diminish that. That's generally not why students are coming to talk to me, though.
Mm-hmm.
Although mandated reporter, I've heard a lot
Yes.
of great things or very sad things over the years. But it's about like women's voices being heard, women's voices being respected. The book opens up with essentially the author, Rebecca Solnit. I'm bad
Soulmate.
at being mansplained about her book that she wrote, either her book or her article.
Oh,
So somebody is like mansplaining to her, not knowing she was the author. And I was like, that's a nice little anecdote. This is not like rooted in this book, but I often tell students, I think it originated in a TED talk and they did it on Grey's Anatomy or vice versa, but like the Superman pose that you're
yes.
supposed to do. And so I even have told, especially some of our students that are more introverted, more meek, I was like, listen, before you go into that classroom, you go to the bathroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stand in a stall or do whatever, and some of it is, it's just confidence. Like I will say, like, you are smarter than most of them, right? Like you've done the reading, you've done the writing, you're articulate, like you can respond, your voice can be heard. And so I think that comes from a space of our schools, right? Our administrators, our
Yeah.
department chairs, who even just like textbook companies, curriculum, that kind of do like the prepackaged stuff, either who is writing it or who is ultimately making the decisions. I just think it's such a slap in the face when professionals, and in this instance, female professionals, don't get a seat at the table.
Yeah. Or they have a seat, but no one's listening to them at the table, right?
They need a
Because
cowbell. I need more cowbell,
right,
like,
but it it's a slippery slope because then if you are
oh, yeah.
right, if you
No.
show up with your full presence and like
Mhm.
intellect and the things you know in the same way, I actually just wrote a LinkedIn post about this, right?
Mm.
You show up with your voice in the same way
Mhm.
as a male would. Women hear things like, you are too loud, you are, all these negative characteristics.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then if you happen to also be a woman of color, now you're aggressive.
Oh,
You are, there's all these huge negative stereotypes. So women are silencing themselves out of probably stress. I'm sure the book talks about that, right? And protection, right? Is this a battle I want to fight right now? But I think the most important question would be, is this a battle we should even have to be
right.
fighting?
It was interesting. I was listening to NPR this morning ahead of France voting to add abortion to their constitution, right? To make it. And they even said, like, they were interviewing someone. They're like, are people actually even against this in your country? And they're like, no, but we saw what happened in America. We want to make sure that this, if other people are in power and it's not about abortion, PS, it's about access to healthcare. Sometimes I
Right?
feel like it's bad branding, right? Like who back in 2000, who was going to leave a child behind, right? I mean, that was my,
That was not about children. That
no.
was about money.
That was about so that is when I started teaching. I graduated in December of 2003. So I started teaching during the NCLB era. And I just remember all the faculty meetings. Let me give you my list of the ones I want to leave behind, like on all the different things we made up for AYP. Oh, I wish I could
Bubble
remember.
kids. Remember always talking
Oh,
about the
mhm.
bubble
Bubble
kids?
kids,
If I could go back in time, that would be like
right?
it, it's set us up for where we are now. To the
100%.
to the point where all we're doing is assessing, like, where's the actual teaching and instruction? Like it's gotten so out of control. Like, I can only hope that everyone keeps just saying all the things and the pendulum can swing back to where it needs to be, because it's just, and
Well,
you're taking away so many things that are of value.
well, and when I have friends who are not in ed, right, and they're always like, good, like, oh, but I saw the test scores online. I'm like, please, if you are going to figure out where you're going to live based on online test scores, like, don't. That is, first of all, if you're looking at any test scores since 2020, you basically should just leave America, right? Like, and like, I don't always need to get into the nuances of like, well, these tests are biased, and it just everything that is like, if that is the sole factor that you're going to look at the school that you want, the community you want to live in, test scores, that would actually be the last thing that I would want to know. I if I'm being I want to know the class size. That's what I want to know. Like, I've always been like a class size proponent because I've seen with my children what happens when you just add a few more in. That's always kind of been because I think
It's important.
Well, the stress it adds to teachers and to parents and to kiddos, and it just, one year I taught high school and I had desks touching all four walls. It was like and they still wanted me to move around, right? Because we got to be, and moving around helps with like the management. And that was before, by the way, people were 1-to-1. So it wasn't like they all had a laptop, but it was a little bit of a maze to zip through.
Yeah.
Make my way up to my overhead projector.
Oh my gosh, the overhead projector. There was one year I was in a portable.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
With 31 sixth graders.
And then it's like,
it was too much.
It's like unfair working conditions and learning conditions. That's, because even like when the pandemic hit, when teachers were like, everybody loved us in March of 2020. But then by August, when we were like, actually, we would like safe working conditions, parents were like, no, take them back. And then we were like,
right? Why are you complaining? You get summers off. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about expectations and lack of boundaries that teachers are supposed to have. Burnout. Another plug for this book.
I know, and I'm not. See, this is written by two sisters. Maybe they're twins. I can't remember. This one, I did not know about the bikini industrial complex. So if you want to just layer in like how women not only need to like be meek and quiet, there's an entire industry that is also like a multi-million-dollar industry trying to make us feel like shit about ourselves for the way that we look and act. And
well, yeah, and it's constantly changing. Like one year is supposed to be like a toothpick, and the next year, you need a booty. And then, like it's never the same.
I'll give another plug for a great historical book. Fit Nation. Oh, where did I put it? It's like the history of, here it is. Fit Nation, the gains and pains of America's exercise obsession. So good. Like, if you like history, read it. If you're a woman, read it. If you like exercise or are overwhelmed by exercise or don't know what, you can check any of those boxes. It was so good. Awesome. Nike didn't think that the sports bra was going to make any money.
Wow.
It was Reebok who was like, hey, we'll get in on the women's gear.
Go Reebok.
Because women were wearing jock straps as sports bras.
I did not know that.
Didn't either. But then I was like, yeah, what did they do before sports bras?
Wore like 3 bras?
Right. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Something like that. Oh my gosh. Okay.
So we got, this is what it's like to have a conversation with me. I apologize if you wanted it to be.
This is what it's like to just have a conversation. This is how our human brains work, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually would share this a lot with my pre-service teachers because they would want to do group work or have, there's time for students to have a conversation. So I think this is a really important thing to say. This is what humans do because you're talking about something and it makes you build a connection or you have a connection to something else. And so you'll go talk about that because it makes sense to what you were talking about. And then it brings you back to where you were. That's a very natural, normal human thing. And teachers, that is what you do. You do it all the time. You do it in professional development. You're not quiet the whole time. You don't sit still the whole time. You're not touching your phone the whole time. So please, let's have some grace for our students. That's my plug for students. Okay. Let's stop expecting young people to do things that full-grown adult people cannot do. So,
Right.
no, but I think this makes sense, right? Like all these things that are happening to women, historically speaking, about women, women in history or not as much as history. I just really think that's so interesting about. I had this conversation, maybe I had it with Kate. We were talking about, or I have another colleague who does history from another institution, and, all these coaches end up in history because I don't know, somehow we think history is not important. So, which I don't understand because history is really important
Yeah.
because that's how we learn and try to do better as humans. So you have female students. You mentioned you have female students
Yes, I do.
come to see you because of sort of the male gaze. Is that the right way? Maybe the male gaze, the male positionality, historically speaking, in history.
Privilege.
Huh?
Privilege.
Male privilege. That's yes. Ding, ding, ding. The male privilege that exists. So how has being able to be in this space, right, where this is again as another form of representation matters, and having people that look like you or may have had some similar experience or can understand your perspective better than maybe some others are really important. How do you see that happening or coming together in your work? Or
I think that, okay, for all my students, right, if I ask them, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? A lot of them will be like, I see myself teaching, maybe having started a master's. They'll say different variations of something about a family, or maybe not, kind of like in that realm. And I want to be like, great. But what if you're not, right? Because the whole idea that we want you to stay in the profession, but a lot of people are leaving in those first like 3 to 5 years.
yeah.
Um, and so I've been trying to find a way to help our students understand that teaching is hard,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the beginning. Like you're going to have to dig deep. Like you're going to have to work through hard stuff. Like and to be clear, I say to them, because my husband is not in education, I'd be like, I can also say for someone who's in the private sector, like things have not always been great. So like teaching is not the only profession that is hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you do have to like set like goals and expectations for yourself. And then I say to, because some of my female students, sometimes they're like, Dr. P, I just want to grow up and be you. And at first I'm like, that's incredibly flattering. Because they're like, you're just, you got 2 kids and you have 2 masters, PhD, and this and that. And I want to be like, I want you to know that was really, really hard. Like,
Yes.
I'll give like an anecdote, right? So one day I'm teaching, it's a college class, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
know it's a 300 level, it's a senior class, it's a social studies methods class. I know a lot of these students. My husband is out of town for work. So I am what we call in our household the parent on duty, as in I'm in town. But I can't totally be on duty because I'm teaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm teaching and I just put them into groups. I set a timer on the board for like 7 minutes or something like that to have them work. And I see a call come through for my kid's school. It's like the dreaded, I'm like, no,
You're
no.
like, oh, that's the worst feeling.
And I'm like, and I don't even know what the call is entailed, who it is in regards to, but I've already gone into problem solver mode while also still trying to like think about this class. So I answer the phone. It's the nurse. Can you come get Brooke? And I'm like, I can't. And then I'm thinking through my Rolodex, I'm like, oh my God, everybody that we are friends with here in town that could go collect this child for me and take her home is a teacher or an educator or is like here on campus teaching right now. And so I have a student and another who is one of the benefits being on a college campus is you have a lot of responsible drivers. So I say,
Yes, I used some former students for my child pickup people for me.
oh, so basically I'm about to have Bree, my current driver in my next class. I call Bree, can you go get my daughter? Can you take her home and then be back in class? And I was like, and I'll pay you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And drops everything. I call the nurse back. I'm like, here's the name of the person who's going to come get it, come get her, all this stuff works out. I do all that in less than 7 minutes. And then the timer goes off and I come back and I'm like, I'm ready to just move on. right? And
Yeah.
all of the students are just like sitting there like this. They're like, did you just do that? I was like, so to be clear, like when you're teaching high school, that wouldn't be the very best way. And they're like, wait. You just like parented and taught us at the same time. And I was like, okay, so actually that's like not a great, I'm actually setting a really like bad example of how to do, but like that's the expectation, right? Like the other parent was out of town. I was trying to do the very best I could to keep with my obligations. And so some of the female students talked to me a couple days later and they're just like, so we said that we wanted to be you, but it turns out that like being you might be a lot of work. And I was like, yeah, like it is.
Yeah.
I have all like I would hats, plates, whatever you're doing. Like I can't just be like, okay, from 11 to 12:15, I am just going to be your professor for this class. And like usually that is my sole responsibility. And I just realized that night why I felt this intense level of burnout. And I felt like I had to come home and disassociate because I had to keep doing what I was doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, could I have stopped what I was doing and canceled my classes and gone and got my daughter? Yes. It would, I really felt based on what the nurse told me, I think like I didn't feel, to be clear, and I'm sounding like a terrible mother. I didn't feel that it required me. I think she just needed to be home.
You don't sound like a terrible mother, but that, there's an actual
Yeah.
theory about that, like the good enough mother. Have you heard about this? Yeah. Right. That's not a thing. Like, and mothers do that. They're like, oh, I feel no, you took care of your child's.
Her needs were met in between. And of course, it was a day that I taught back-to-back classes. In that 10 minutes, I talked to her on the phone, made sure everything was okay, taught another, and so like, I think this, and that's just like one example. Like if you are, in high school, when you're teaching high school and it's a 7 period day or 8 period day, and you teach 5 of them, and you have a plan period, and then you have a lunch and a duty. Like there is, I think you are on so much of our profession
Mm-hmm.
on, like I even was like joking. I was like doing this podcast at 7 o'clock at night. Should definitely be out of my bra and in yoga pants at this point. Like, it'll be on Zoom, so I gotta think about that. But I was talking to my parents last night. I was like, "Oh, I gotta get into my pajamas." I'm like, "Please no, I need to get. I'm in comfy clothes. I need to get into more comfortable clothes. Like, there's a trajectory."
Yes.
But I think that for women, I'm going to speak about women in education because
Mm-hmm.
this happens to all my female friends that are also in the corporate world, in realtors, anything, any woman. I feel like we often do our jobs. We do some of the invisible female related tasks. And depending what's going on in your personal life, and to be clear, I have a wonderful husband. He's an excellent co-parent, but like our responsibilities don't just stop during those bell hours. And so I can
Right.
see burnout is even higher for female teachers. I have often, so I just now have a child in high school. So I still have my license, but I haven't used my 9 through 12 license in a while. So it's like
Yeah.
theoretically the first time I could teach one of my children. And let's just know that would go disastrous. It would be, I'm like, yesterday he had to write a paper and he was like, I should have dad read it. And I was like, you're right. And to be clear, my husband is a grammar genius, but like, no, I don't teach people how to write or have written a dissertation, thesis, but I often, when my children were little, would wonder, I was like, how do elementary school teachers do this and then go home and have their own small children?
I actually taught elementary, middle. I've taught all grades, elementary, middle, and high school, and college. I'm a weird little unicorn girl.
You are a unicorn.
I know. I
Which one was your
know.
favorite?
Oh, you know what? I like them all for different reasons.
That's what you say, especially with like, who's your favorite child?
But I really mean it. Like, that's not a cop out answer.
No, no.
Like, I really do enjoy them for different reasons. The elementary kids, I just love they're just so curious and they're also like really cute, but I just love their curiosity, and they just think of things and they just share those things. And oftentimes they haven't like yet hit the world that's told them that that's weird, right? And they just are themselves. And I
Yep.
love that about elementary kids. Middle schoolers, I feel like get this bad rap,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
But I love this juxtaposition of them, like where they're like still kind of kid like, but then they're trying to be grown, and they get sarcasm now, which is super fun, right? So they're a fun middle school group. High school kids, you can have some really
Yeah.
in-depth conversation with high school kids. They really are like pioneers in like a lot of ways around advocating, especially high school kids now, right? They're really trying to use their voice, and I actually think we could take some lessons from these young people about how to advocate for what's important to us and be a little relentless about it. I
Yeah.
love that. Like, be unshakably relentless about what sets your soul on fire and what is important, right? Like truly important.
Yeah.
So, and they're like trying to figure out what they want to do
And it's
in the
interesting.
world, right?
So,
And so, you know, and then college students are also trying to figure out what they're doing. But
but they
I
can
really
drink and they're not required to go to class.
right. I mean, and I had the privilege, I mostly taught juniors and seniors because, I was in teacher ed too.
Yeah,
So
me
it was
too.
like at the
Mhm.
point where they were like interested in their career at another institution. Like I worked with freshmen and stuff, and they were trying to figure it out. But I just enjoy like they're also figuring out what they want to do, and like the potential and the of these folks to go out into the field of education with their thoughts and ideas. And so I enjoyed them all
And
for
like,
various.
so I have and I have I can teach junior high, but I never did. But my daughter's in eighth grade. And so basically, like for the past 4 years, my son is in ninth grade. My son's a freshman. So it's been very interesting. Like I said, I can actually, like, I have taught high school and could theoretically teach him. And it's, and, and he also, I should share, like, he is autistic and has ADHD. So we have a lot of these conversations about how, like, our public schools are not built for neurodiverse kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how, I'm like, but I studied. And I'm like, well, how did you study? I spent so much time. And I'm like, but what did you do during that time? It's just like, and when things are so black and white to him, it's just and I guess that's another piece to go back to. I think you may have only asked me one question, maybe two, but to go back to like my your first question about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think that an area of education that I never really thought of before, that I felt as a general ed teacher, I was in IEP meetings, right? And even as a
Mm-hmm.
college instructor, I meet all the accommodations, right? I feel like I have more accommodations now than I used to. I have like a folder. I even actually then started just keeping a note, like a quick one, like this class, and just so I can remember. Because in high school, there was a person that did that for you, right? That
Right.
is one drawback of, and we could talk about that even too. Like, how do we meet the accommodations? We have all these kiddos who've had accommodations K-12, and they come in, and sometimes people who weren't previously K-12 teachers, they don't even really understand accommodations, right? Or
Well, yes, because historically speaking, you just need to be an expert in your content, not necessarily an educator in
right.
higher ed. Yeah.
Here, it is more work. Now, I would say most of my accommodations, that just because of the nature of my classes, a lot of them are just like time and a half, but I don't like on
Mm-hmm.
exams. Like, I don't really give like a lot of it's like papers and lesson plans. But I tell when I do teach freshmen, and even now when I teach juniors and seniors, I say, listen, if you had an accommodation K-12, now is not the time to take the training wheels off, right? Like, use your accommodations, because you still have these 4 years of teaching, or 4 years as a student. So I think that has been an interesting space for me as a parent. So Jake was diagnosed between fourth and fifth grade. So basically when he was in fifth grade, that was the first time I attended an IEP meeting as a parent. And even my husband, again, not in education, I had printed out the IP. It was highlighted. I had notes, everything. And he like read it and everything. But afterwards, he was like, what do people do if they go into one of these meetings and one of the two people aren't in education?
Yeah.
And to be clear, like they've all had great interactions and everything, but like even the system, it's like a law that's meant to help and protect kids and to give them, the least restrictive environment and everything. But sometimes I think that it's not only overwhelming for the student, but it's overwhelming for the parents. And so I think that that's another piece of the diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I like to use I use the word neurospicy, but our neurodiverse friends, because that it's a whole, and you hear people say like everybody has a diagnosis now or everybody's on a prescription now. And I was like, well, but the thing is, like, there's a really good chance that people were just not being diagnosed for a really long time. We didn't know, we didn't have.
Oh, I would agree with that. Like we didn't know what we didn't know. And now that we know, right? I think the worst thing to do is always look at like how something was done to determine how something should be done. Like, cause just cause you've done it that way in the past doesn't mean that's still the best way. Cause when you know more, you should do better.
Right.
Right. Like, and even access to come to those IEP meetings, right? Because I don't know what the solution is to that, but they always happen in the middle of the day. And if you have parents that can't get there, like, and I'm not saying like teachers should have to stay after school, but there's a lot of complicated things around access that are really important to think about too, related to that, because that's a
Even
whole
just
barrier for folks.
even just knowing, like to your example earlier, you said earlier, like everybody thinks they're an expert in education because they were a student once, right?
Yes.
And so, but when you're coming to that space as a parent who needs an accommodation, if you had a, like, first of all, even walking into a high school or junior high can just like trigger trauma,
Oh,
right? Like,
absolutely.
or assuming that like your bad experience is also going to happen to your kid, like, and even just, I have found that the people that we have worked with have been really awesome and accommodating, especially because like I ask questions from the perspective of an educator, but I'm not a special educator.
Right.
I am I was a general ed, and my husband asks questions from somebody who like didn't have an IEP, doesn't know, he knows Jake and he knows what will work best for him. Like, and I think even just like whether you have a diagnosis or not, like a new space that teacher ed, a new responsibility of teacher ed is executive function. I now spend, and my colleagues as well, like their advisor and other folks teaching methods classes, we now have to say, do you have a planner? Do you know how to use a planner? Because this, I hate saying like this generation, this group, the Google Classroom group, and they think that going into what we now use Canvas, just going in there and finding due dates, like that's their planner. And we're like, no, 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 no. Like it's learning how to balance. Like I sat down with a student once and I said, okay, let's I do this regularly now, teaching them how to plan their week.
Yeah.
Write down when you have class, when you work, this and that. Then we tell them schedule in like what do you like, what makes you tick? Some of them, I like to lift. I like, what I like to read. Okay, we schedule it in. I say, let's just for fun schedule in 8 hours of sleep. Okay. Just because. Okay. And even though we're history majors, let's do a little math. There's 24 hours in a day. And then I show them that little graphic, that little chart that says, like, if you have a 3 credit class, like how many hours a week
Right.
you do outside. Okay. So, okay. And so we do the math and it like, you just see like the steam coming out of their ear. They're like, the math doesn't math. Like it doesn't, and so it's just like teaching them how to manage their time because they were in high school where there was 50 minutes every day, because you see your teacher every day, a lot of time is built in to work on things in class. Your evenings were scheduled, right? Whether you worked or whether you were babysitting or whether you had this practice, like your whole day was figured out for you. And then you get to college and you make a schedule and you have to figure these things out. And like they can't do it.
Yeah.
And it is a, like, I hate like blaming things on COVID, but I do think like like I did not have to spend this much time executive functioning, time management, how to use a planner. That is something I did not do regularly before COVID
That's interesting.
because they don't do planner check, right? Like think about like in junior high and high school, well, maybe not so much high school, maybe freshman, but like in junior high, even in elementary, like I remember signing my kids' planners and then it just like went away because it's on a device.
I never had to sign a planner, nor did I ever. That was never even an expectation. But, I'm a Gen Xer, so I was literally responsible for myself by the time I was like 7. So
I'm in this weird space where I am considered a geriatric millennial, which I think is just really mean. Like,
you don't like that term.
no, because I was born in 1982. So like I had things like we had a landline, right? Like we were able, like I made mixed tapes. There's like a whole list of things that like make you a before and after.
Yes. No, but so even if they're digital, I think this brings up a good point, right? Like we need to think about as times move, how do our systems and structures change to help support students with success? And it may look different than it did before. What do I do now? Oh, I always had a planner, or I signed a planner, or I used a paper planner. Like I haven't used a paper planner myself in a long time because as soon as I had a BlackBerry and I could like color code stuff, like I was like a happy girl.
And what we tell them is you don't have to have a paper planner.
Right.
Right.
But you have to plan something.
You have to have a system.
Yes.
A lot of them be like, I use this sticky note feature on my laptop. That's not a system, like, or they'll say like, I make a huge long to-do list and I get overwhelmed. I say, okay, I got a strategy for you. Make your huge long to-do list, pick the top 3 things, do those 3 things, and then go watch one episode of a show on Netflix and then come back. You know what I mean? Like, it's it's just the strategies, I guess.
Yes.
And so I use a hybrid model of a calendar. Like we have a family shared calendar that I have shoot into my Outlook calendar, but I also I like to sometimes, I like to paper it and kind of I do a little bit of both.
That's fair. That's fair.
There's no right way or wrong.
There is no right or wrong way. You find your own system and make it work for you and borrow from other people's systems. So, well, Sara, this has been such a pleasure. And I always like to end with a pro tip, advice. What would be, when we're thinking about equity work, what's kind of your pro tip and advice for the listeners?
So I don't want to mess up the quote, but Shirley Chisholm quote. Oh, wait. It is one of those things that like I have it in if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. That is Shirley Chisholm. If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And so I think my message is, okay, couple parts. If you're at the table, who do you need to invite in? Whose voice is not being heard? Because you have the privilege of being at a table. So who else can you invite? And advocate for yourself. I think that it's really important it's going to make you uncomfortable from time to time, but I do think you have to say like, this situation is wrong and there needs to be other voices at this table. So yeah, I used a historical quote for my pro tip.
I love it though. I love it because those are both very important things for us to think about and reflect on in our equity journey. Because how do you use your allyship to support the equity efforts? And
right.
other people's voices. So I love that. I want to thank you, Sara, so much for your time today. It has been such a pleasure talking to you. I want to
so fun.
Yes, so fun. And thank you all the listeners. I will make sure to put links in the show notes to the books we talked about today. And remember to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast and share with your educator friends. And remember to use your voice today. This wraps up another episode of the Equity Hour podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Make sure to check out the show notes for any resources, links, and next steps from today's episode. Head on over to Instagram and give us a follow at Dragonfly Rising LLC for more tips, resources, and opportunities to connect. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, intent is not enough. Action is necessary. How will you use your voice today?